And finally, I want to bring up Ross Wilcox, who is a PhD student in fiction here in the English department, and he's going to give a proper introduction for Paul Beatty. So here's Ross.
Good afternoon, everyone. I did some research in preparation for this introduction, and so according to Wikipedia, Paul Beatty is an American author and also an associate professor of writing at Columbia University. On Wikipedia, it also said he's written 2 books of poetry and 4 novels, which I found consistent with the claim that he is an author. And in fact, and then last night at the talk, he told us himself that he teaches at Columbia. So in this case, the information on Wikipedia is 100% accurate. Anyways, Paul Beatty, he won the Man Booker Prize in 2016, very prestigious international literary prize. And I think it's a big deal because he's the first American to ever win the prize. And so, like, I follow the literary prizes and stuff. And when I heard the news, I was like, in your face, England, in your face, Australia and Canada and wherever else, everybody writes like novels originally in the English language is like the prerequisite for the eligibility or whatever. So, my response was one of patriotism. And so before I shut up, I just want to touch briefly on like my experience reading Beatty for the first time and the response to his book. And so, like with any novel, like no 2 people have the exact same response, but I was drawn into the narrator's voice in The Sellout, the narrator's voice and the humor and stuff. But, at the same time, like the book's reputation has, kind of been hijacked by the press and publishers or whoever's responsible for like putting a label on the book or, saying this is what genre the book is, because it's been labeled as satire. And Beatty himself rejects this label, and not that, like my opinion or, has any authority or whatever, but I agree. And because for me, this is just my opinion, but at the end of the day, what makes a novel great, what stays with me for me is character. It's like the human element in the novel that I connect to, become invested in, and care about. And in The Sellout Man, it's the narrator Me, his last name's Me, and also the character Hominy Jenkins. And when they're created vividly, humanly enough, or whatever, man, it's kind of like a less intense, emotional connection that I have to any other human being in my life. That's why I connected with the novels, because of these characters. And man, it's about, yes, it's funny and it's deals with race, but it's also about these 2 dudes, man, who've lost their hometown and they want to get it back. And I think it's pretty moving and poignant and even heartbreaking, like the extreme lengths and even absurd lengths they go to try and create the world they want to see and resurrect the past and stuff. And so because history and the past is such a big theme in this novel, I kept thinking when I was reading it about that Faulkner quote about like, the past isn't the past, it's not even the whatever, we all know that quote. And I want to just read this very brief. It's like there's only like 3 sentences from his novel, because Beatty says something similar. He writes, "That's the problem with history. We like to think it's a book that we can turn the page and move the fuck on. But history isn't the paper it's printed on. It's memory, and memory is time, emotions, and song. History is the things that stay with you." And so, through that lens, like, I just think it's like equal parts heartbreaking and disturbing, that like to think about the history that's motivating, Hominy Jenkins and the narrator in this novel to like do the stuff they do. But anyways, that's the end of my rant about my take on the book or whatever. And so without further ado, please put your hands together and help me in welcoming Paul Beatty to UNT.
Hey, everyone. I heard you're on holiday, so I can't believe you're here, but I appreciate it. I'm a little tired, so bear with me. I don't like reading very much, which is probably not the first thing I should say. I think I'm just going to – I used to write poetry, and I think I'm just going to read little snippets. Maybe think of them as poems. I don't know, but it's not going to make any sense. You've been forewarned. But, yeah, thank you. And Kyle, where's Kyle at? There he is, man. Thank you a lot, man. I've had a good time, and I appreciate you bringing me here, and it's meant a lot to me. So I'm just gonna. The prologue is like 50 pages long, but I'm gonna read like snippets of the prologue. This may be hard to believe coming from a black man, but I've never stolen anything. Never cheated on my taxes or at cards. Never snuck into the movies or failed to give back the extra change to a drugstore cashier, indifferent to the ways of mercantilism and minimum wage expectations. I've never burgled a house, held up a liquor store. Never boarded a crowded bus or subway car. Sat in the seat reserved for the elderly, pulled out my gigantic penis, and masturbated to satisfaction with a perverted yet somehow crestfallen look on my face. But here I am, in the cavernous chambers of the Supreme Court of the United States of America. My car, illegally and somewhat ironically, parked on Constitution Avenue. My hands cuffed and crossed behind my back. My right to remain silent, long since waived and said goodbye to, as I sit in a thickly padded chair that, much like this country, isn't quite as comfortable as it looks. Summoned here by an officious-looking envelope stamped "Important" in large sweepstakes red letters, I haven't stopped squirming since I arrived in this city. Dear Sir, the letter read, congratulations, you may already be a winner. Your case has been selected from the hundreds of other appellate cases to be heard by the Supreme Court of the United States of America. What a glorious honor. It's highly recommended that you arrive at least 2 hours early for your hearing scheduled for 10 a.m. on the morning of March 19th, the year of our Lord. The letter closed with directions to the Supreme Court building from the airport, the train station, I-95, and a set of clip-out coupons to various attractions, restaurants, and bed and breakfasts and the like. There was no signature. It simply ended, sincerely yours, the people of the United States of America. Washington, D.C., with its wide streets, confounding roundabouts, marble statues, Doric columns, and domes, is supposed to feel like ancient Rome. That is, if the streets of ancient Rome were lined with homeless black people, bomb-sniffing dogs, tour buses, and cherry blossoms. Yesterday afternoon, like some sandal-shod Ethiop from the sticks of the darkest of the Los Angeles jungles, I ventured from the hotel and joined the hodge of blue-jeaned yokels that paraded slowly and patriotically past the Empire's historic landmarks. I stood in awe at the Lincoln Memorial. If Honest Abe had come to life and somehow managed to lift his bony 23-foot, 4-inch frame from his throne, what would he say? What would he do? Would he break dance? Would he pitch pennies against the curbside? Would he read the paper and see that the union he'd saved was now a dysfunctional plutocracy, that the people he freed were now slaves to rhythm, rap, and predatory lending, and that today his skill set would be better suited to the basketball court than the White House? There he could catch the rock on the break, pull up for a bearded three-pointer, hold the pose, and talk shit as the ball popped the net. The great emancipator. You can't stop him. You can only hope to contain him. Not surprisingly, there's nothing to do at the Pentagon except start a war. Tourists aren't even allowed to take photos with the building in the background. So when the sailor-suited family of Navy veterans, 4 generations deep, handed me a disposable camera and asked me to follow at a distance and secretly take photos of them while they snapped to attention, saluted, and flashed peace signs for no apparent reason, I was only too happy to serve my country. At the National Mall, there was a one-man march on Washington. A lone white boy lay on the grass, fucking with the depth perception in such a way that the distant Washington Monument looked like a massive, pointy-tipped Caucasian hard-on streaming from his unzipped trousers. He joked with passerby, smiling into their camera phones and stroking his trick photography priapism. At the zoo, I stood in front of the primate cage, listening to a woman marvel at how presidential the 400-pound gorilla looked sitting astride a shorn oaken limb, keeping a watchful eye over his cage brood. When her boyfriend, his finger tapping the informational placard, pointed out that the presidential silverback's name coincidentally was Baraka, the woman laughed aloud, until she saw me, the other 400-pound gorilla in the room. That really happened, actually. I was there. I couldn't believe that the gorilla's name was Baraka, but Barack was in the White House. So this is sort of kind of true. Anyways. Stuffing something that might have been the last of a big stick popsicle or a Chiquita banana in my mouth. Then she became disconsolate, crying and apologizing for having spoken her mind and my having been born. Some of my best friends are monkeys, she said accidentally. It was my turn to laugh. I understood where she was coming from. This whole city's a Freudian slip of the tongue, a concrete hard-on for America's deeds and misdeeds. Slavery, manifest destiny, Laverne and Shirley, standing by idly while Germany tried to kill every Jew in Europe. Why, some of my best friends are the Museum of African Art, the Holocaust Museum, the Museum of the American Indian, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, and furthermore, I'll have you know my sister's daughter is married to an orangutan. All it takes is a day trip through Georgetown and Chinatown, a slow saunter past the White House, Phoenix House, Blair House, and the local crack house for the message to become abundantly clear. Be in ancient Rome or modern-day America, you're either citizen or slave, lion or Jew, guilty or innocent, comfortable or uncomfortable. And here in the Supreme Court of the United States of America, fucketh between the handcuffs and the slipperiness of this chair's leather upholstery, the only way I can keep from spilling my ass ignominiously onto the goddamn floor is to lean back until I'm reclined at an angle just short of detention room nonchalance, but definitely well past courtroom content. Yeah, I'm going to do something about, I've never read any of these bits before, so sorry. He's kind of like getting high in the Supreme Court. Like, this is all before his trial has started or the hearing. As you can tell, I'm not very good at this. I'm sorry. So anyway, he's been coming up with a motto for the black race. When I was 10, I spent a long night buried under my comforter, cuddled up with Funshine Bear, who, filled with foamy enigmatic sense of language and Bloomian dogmatism, was the most literary of the Care Bears and my harshest critic. In the musty darkness of that rayon bat cave, his stubby, all but immobile yellow arms struggled to hold the flashlight steady as together we tried to save the black race in 8 words or less. Putting my home school Latin to good use, I'd crank out a motto, then shove it under his heart-shaped plastic nose for approval. My first effort, Black America, Vini Vidi Vici, fried chicken, peeled back Funshine's ears and closed his hard plastic eyes in disappointment. Semper Fi, Semper Funky, raised his polyester hackles, and when he began to paw the mattress in anger and reared up on his stubby yellow legs, bearing his ursine fangs and claws, I tried to remember what the Cub Scout manual said to do when confronted by an angry stuffed cartoon bear, drunk on stolen credenza wine and editorial power. If you meet an angry bear, remain calm, speak in gentle tones, stand your ground, get large, and write in clear, simple, uplifting Latin sentences. Unum corpus, unum mens, una cor, unum amor. One body, one mind, one heart, one love. Not bad. It had a nice license plate ring to it. I could see it in cursive circumnavigating the rim of a race war medal of honor. Funshine didn't hate it, but from the way he wrinkled his nose right before falling asleep that night, I could tell he felt my slogan implied a certain groupthink, and weren't black people always complaining about being labeled as monolithic. I didn't ruin his dreams by telling him that black people do all think alike. They won't admit it, but every black person thinks they're better than every other black person. I've never heard back from the NAACP or the Urban League, so that black credo exists only in my head, impatiently awaiting on a movement, a nation, and I suppose, since nowadays branding is everything, a logo. Maybe we don't need a motto. How many times have I heard someone say, "Nigga, you don't know me. My motto is," if I were smart, I'd put my Latin to use, charge $10 a word, $15 if they aren't from the neighborhood or want me to translate, "Don't hate the player, hate the game." If it's true that one's body is one's temple, I can make good money. Open up a little shop on the boulevard and have a long line of tattooed customers who've transformed themselves into non-denominational places of worship. Ankhs, Sankofas, and crucifixes, fighting for abdominal space with Aztec sun gods and one-starred Star of David galaxies. Chinese characters running down shaved calves and spinal columns, sinological shout-outs to dead loved ones that they think means "rest in peace, Grandma Beverly," but in reality reads, "No ticky, no bilateral trade agreement." Man, it'd be a goddamn gold mine. high as the price of cigarettes. They'd come at all hours of the night. I could sit behind a thick plexiglass window and have one of those sliding metal drop boxes that the gas station's attendants use. I'd slide out the drawer, and like prisoners passing jailhouse kites, my clientele would surreptitiously hand me their affirmations. The harder the man, the neater the handwriting. The more soft-hearted the woman, the more pugnacious the phrase. You know me, they'd say. My motto is, and drop the cash in the quotations from Shakespeare and Scarface, biblical passages, schoolyard aphorisms, and hoodlum truisms, written in every medium from blood to eyeliner into the drawer. And whether it was scribbled on a crumpled-up bar napkin, a paper plate stained with barbecue sauce and potato salad, was a page carefully torn from a secret diary kept since a stir in juvenile hall, that if I tell anyone, it'll be my ass, ya estuvo, whatever that means. I take the job seriously, for these are people for whom the phrase, well, if you put a gun to my head, isn't theoretical. And when someone has pressed a cold metal muzzle into the yin and yang symbol tattooed on your temple, and you've lived to tell about it, you don't need to have read the I Ching to appreciate the cosmic balance of the universe and the power of the tramp stamp. Because what else could your motto possibly be but what goes around comes around? Quod circumventutur revihitur. I can't say any Latin, so forgive me. When business is slow, they'll come by to show me my handiwork, the old English lettering glistening in the streetlight, its orthography parsed in sweaty tank and tube top musculatures. Money talks, bullshit walks, pecunia sermo, somnium ambulo. Dot of inaccusative clauses burnished into their jugulars. There's something special about having the language of science and romance surf the tidal waves of a homegirl's body fat. Strictly dickly. Austeris verba. That shaky noun declension that with ticker tape across their foreheads would be the closest most of them ever get to being white, to reading white. Crip up or grip up. Cryptum vexo, el carpo vex. It's not essentialism. Blood in, blood out. Munio in, munio sickle. It's the satisfaction of looking at your motto in the mirror and thinking, any nigga who isn't paranoid is crazy. Ulus nigga vir quisnam est non insanus ist rabidus. It's something Julius Caesar would have said if he were black. Act your age, not your shoe size. Factio vestri avium non vestri calcius amplitudo. And if an increasingly pluralistic America ever decides to commission a new motto, I'm open for business because I've got a better one than E pluribus unum. Tu dormis, tu perdis. You snooze, you lose. This is just not going to make any sense, but I'm sorry. That's the bitch of it, to be on trial for my life and for the first time ever not feel guilty. That omnipresent guilt that's as black as fast food apple pie and prison basketball is finally gone. And it almost feels white to be unburdened from the racial shame that makes a bespectacled college freshman dread fried chicken Fridays at the dining hall. I was the diversity the school trumpeted so loudly in its glossy literature, but there wasn't enough financial aid in the world to get me to suck the gristle from a leg bone in front of the entire freshman class. I'm no longer party to that collective guilt that keeps the third chair cellist, the administrative secretary, the stock clerk, the not really all that attractive but she's black beauty pageant winner from showing up for work Monday morning and shooting every white motherfucker in the place. It's a guilt that has obligated me to mutter, my bad, for every misplaced bounce pass, politician under federal investigation, every bug-eyed and Rasta-voiced comedian, every black film made since 1968. But I don't feel responsible anymore. I understand now that the only time black people don't feel guilty is when we've actually done something wrong, because that relieves us from the cognitive dissonance of being black and innocent. And in a way, the prospect of going to jail becomes a relief, in the way that cooning is a relief, voting Republican is a relief, marrying white is a relief, albeit a temporary one. This is a little bit about his father. My memories of my father aren't all that bad. Though technically I was an only child, Daddy, like many black men, had lots of kids. The citizens of Dickens were his progeny. While he wasn't very good with horses, he was known around town as the nigger whisperer. Whenever some nigga done lost their motherfucking mind, needed to be talked down from a tree or freeway overpass precipice, the call would go out. My father would grab his social psychology Bible, The Planning of Change by Bennis, Benny, and Robert Chin, a woefully underappreciated Chinese-American psychologist my dad had never met but claimed as his mentor. Most kids got bedtime stories and fairy tales. I had to fall asleep to readings from chapters with titles like The Utility of Models of the Environments of Systems for Practitioners. My father was nothing if not a practitioner. I can't remember a time when he didn't bring me along on a nigger whisper. On the drive over, he'd brag that the black community was a lot like him, ABD, all but dissertation, all but defeated. When we arrived, he'd sit me on the roof of a nearby minivan or stand me up atop an alleyway dumpster, hand me a legal pad, and tell me to take notes. Among all the flashing sirens, the crying, and broken glass crunching softly under his buckskin shoes, I'd be so scared for him. But Daddy had a way of approaching the unapproachable. His face sympathetic and sullen, palms turned up like a dashboard Jesus figurine, he'd walk towards some knife-wielding lunatic whose pupils were dilated to the size of atoms smashed by a quart of Hennessy and a 12-pack light beer chaser. Ignoring the blood-stained work uniform, caked in brain and fecal matter, he'd hug the person like he was greeting an old friend. People thought it was his selflessness that allowed him to get so close. But to me, it was his voice that got him over. Doo-wop bass deep, my father spoke in F sharp. A resonant low-pitched tone that rooted you in place like a bobby-socked teenager listening to the Five Satins sing in the still of the night. It's not the music that soothes the savage beast, but the systematic desensitization. And Father's voice had a way of relaxing the enraged and allowing them to confront their fears anxiety-free. When I was in grade school, I knew from how the taste of the pomegranates would bring you to tears, from the way the summer sun turned our afros blood orange red, and from how giddy my father would get whenever he talked about Dodger Stadium, White Zinfandel, and the latest green flash sunset he'd seen from the summit of Mount Wilson, that California was a special place. And if you think about it, pretty much everything that made the 20th century bearable was invented in a California garage. The Apple computer, the boogie board, and gangster rap. Thanks to my dad's career in nigger whispering, I was there for the birth of the latter, when at 6 o'clock on a cold, dark ghetto morning, 2 blocks down from where I live, Carl Kilo G. Garfield, hallucinatingly high on his own supply, and Alfred Lord Tennyson's brooding lyricism, burst out of his garage, squinting into his moleskin, a smoldering crack pipe dangling from fingertips. It was the height of the crack rock era, and I was about 10 when he clambered into the bed of his tricked-out hot rod his yellow Toyota pickup truck. The toe and the top buffed and painted over so that the brand name on the tailgate read just Yo, and began reciting his verse at the top of his lungs. The slurred iambic pentameter punctuated with gun claps from his nickel-plated 38 and pleas from his mama to take his naked ass inside. Charge of the light-skinned spade. Half a liter, half a liter, half a liter onward. All in the alley of death rode the Old English 800. Forward the light-skinned spade. Charge for the Bloods, they said. Into the alley of death rode the Old English 800. When the SWAT team finally arrived on the scene, taking cover behind patrol car doors and the sycamore trees, clutching their assault rifles to their chests, none of them could stop giggling long enough to take the kill shot. Theirs not to reason what the fuck, theirs but to shoot and duck. Niggas to the right of them, niggas to the left of them, niggas in front of them. Partied and blundered, bum-rushed at cops in Hollow Point shell, while Hoopty and Hoodlum fell. They that had banged so well came through the jaws of death, back from the hose of hell. All that was left of them, left of the Old English 800. And when my father, the nigger whisperer, that beatific smile splashed across his face, eased his way past the police barricade, put a tweed jacketed arm around the broken-down drug dealer, and spoke some whispered profundity into his ear, Kilo G blinked blankly like a stage show volunteer struck dumb at it by an Indian casino hypnotist, then calmly handed over his gun and the keys to his heart. The police closed in for arrest, but my father asked them to stay back, beckoning Kilo to finish his poem, even joining in at the end of each line, pretending he knew the words. When can their shine and buzz fade? Oh, the buck-wild charge they made. All the motherfucking world wondered. Respect the charge they made. Respect the charge of the light-skinned spade. The noble, now empty, Old English 800. The police vans and cruisers disappeared into the morning haze, leaving my father, godlike, in the middle of the street, reveling in his humanitarianism. Cockily turned toward me. You know what I said to get that psychotic motherfucker to lower his gun? What'd you say, Daddy? I said, brother, you have to ask yourself 2 questions. Who am I, and how may I become myself? That's basic person-centered therapeutics. You want the client to feel important, to feel that he or she is in control of the healing process. Remember that shit. I wanted to ask him why he never spoke to me in the same reassuring tone that he used with his clients, but I knew instead of an answer, I'd get the belt, and my healing process would involve mercurochrome, and in place of being grounded, a sentence of 5 to no less than 3 weeks of Jungian active imagination. In the distance, hurtling away from me like some distant spiral galaxy, the red and blue siren spun silently but brilliantly, lighting up the midst of the morning marine layer like some inner city aurora borealis. I fingered a bullet hole in the tree bark, thinking that like the slug buried 10 rings deep in the trunk, I'd never leave this neighborhood, that I'd go to the local high school, graduate in the middle of my class, another Willie Lump with a 6-line resume rife with spelling errors, trekking back and forth between the job center, the strip club parking lot, and the civil service exam tutorials. I'd marry, fucking kill Marpessa Delissa Dawson, the bitch next door and my one and only love. Have kids, threaten them with military school, and promises not to bail them out if they ever got arrested. I'd be the type of nigga who played pool at the titty bar and cheated on his wife with the blonde cheese girl from Trader Joe's on National and Westwood Boulevards. I'd stop pestering my father about my missing mother, finally admitting to myself that motherhood, like the artistic triangle, is overrated. After a lifetime of beating myself up for never having been breastfed or finishing The Lord of the Rings, Paradise, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Eventually, like all lower middle-class Californians, I'd die in the same bedroom I'd grown up in, looking up at the cracks in the stucco ceiling that have been there since the '68 quake. So introspective questions like, who am I and how can I be that person, didn't pertain to me then, because I already knew the answer. Like the entire town of Dickens, I was my father's child, a product of my environment, and nothing more. Dickens was me, and I was my father. Problem is, they both disappeared from my life. First my dad, then my hometown, and suddenly I had no idea who I was and no clue how to become myself. Chapter 2. West Side, nigga, what? I'm just going to read a little bit more, just hang in there a little. I'm sorry, I don't know where anything is. This is from a section called Too Many Mexicans. Too many Mexicans, Charisma Molina muttered, speaking through her perfect French manicure so she wouldn't be overheard. It wasn't the first time I'd heard that racist sentiment expressed in public. Ever since the Native Americans trod up and down El Camino Real in their moccasins, seeking the source of those annoying fucking bells that rang at daybreak every Sunday morning, scaring away the bighorn sheep and ruining many a mescaline-tripping spirit walk, Californians have been cursing the Mexicans. The Indians who were looking for peace and quiet ended up finding Jesus, forced labor, and the whip, and the rhythm method. Too many Mexicans, they'd whisper to themselves in the wheat fields in the back pews when no one was looking. White people, the type who never used to have anything to say to black people except, we have no vacancies, you missed a spot, and rebound the basketball, finally have something to say to us. And on hot 104-degree San Fernando Valley days, when we're carrying their groceries to their cars or stuffing their mailboxes with bills, they turn and say, too many Mexicans. A tacit agreement between aggrieved strangers that it's neither the heat nor the humidity, but the blame lies with our little brown brothers to the south and the north and next door and at the Grove and everywhere else in Califas. For black people, too many Mexicans is the excuse we, the historically most documented workers in history, give ourselves for attending racist rallies protesting the undocumented workers seeking better living conditions. Too many Mexicans is an oral rationalization to remain stuck in our ways. We like to dream over tea about relocating, finding better living conditions while riffing through the real estate classifieds. What about Glendale, baby? Too many Mexicans. Downey? Too many Mexicans. Bellflower? Too many Mexicans. Too many Mexicans. It's a bromide for every unlicensed contractor tired of being underbid and refusing to blame their lack of employment on shoddy workmanship, nepotistic hiring practice, and a long list of shitty online references. Mexicans are to blame for everything. Someone in California sneezes, you don't say Gesundheit, but too many Mexicans. Your horse in the fifth comes up lame in the backstretch at Santa Anita, too many Mexicans. The donkey on the Button River's a third queen at the Commerce Casino, too many Mexicans. It's a constant California refrain. But when Charisma Molina, assistant principal of Chaff Middle School and best friend to Marpessa, my girlfriend no matter what the fuck she says, said it, it was both the first time I'd ever heard a Mexican American say it, and though I didn't know it then, the first time I'd heard anyone mean it literally. I'm just going to read like the last little bit. It's a part called Closure. I remember the day after the black dude was inaugurated. Foy Cheshire, proud as punch, driving around town in his coupe, honking his horn and waving an American flag. He wasn't the only one celebrating. The neighborhood glee wasn't O.J. Simpson getting acquitted or the Lakers winning the 2002 championship, but it was close. Foy drove past the crib, and I happened to be sitting in front yard husking corn. "Why are you waving the flag?" I asked him. "Why now? I've never seen you wave it before." He said that he felt like the country, the United States of America, had finally paid off its debts. And what about the Native Americans? What about the Chinese, the Japanese, the Mexicans, the poor, the forest, the water, the air, the fucking California condor? When do they collect? I asked him. He just shook his head at me, said something to the effect that my father would be ashamed of me and that I'd never understand. And he's right. I never will. Thanks.
So I think Paul's ready to answer some questions if you have some. So anybody want to ask? I think we have one question here.
You mentioned being a film buff last night and writing screenplays. How do you see film working into your conceptual writing in general?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, they have any direct connection or correlation really, but I think about going to the movies and, and you see something. What's the Kurosawa movie where they kidnap the kid? High and Low, is that it? Anyways, it's a black. This is not going to make any sense. I can't believe I have a career because I don't make any sense. But it's like I remember going to see that movie for the first time. I don't know, I must have been 15 or something, and it's a black and white movie, and in the middle of the movie they're trying to find this kid who's been kidnapped, and he's like in a Japanese ghetto, and they're just looking over the skyline, and they get the warning sign, which is this pink smoke in this black and white movie that you've been watching for an hour and a half. So it's one of those things where I go, oh, I didn't know you can do that, I remember when I first started thinking about poetry, I was watching some guy read a poem on television. This is a long time ago in the 80s. He was reading his poem, and in the middle of the poem, he went, which if you like Parliament Funkadelic, just echoes back. And I just went, oh, I didn't know you could do that. You know what I mean? So it's, it's all these things. I did the same from visual art, I remember going in, when I first moved to New York, a friend of mine worked at a gallery, and there was an artist, Robert Ryman. Just the frames kind of look like this a little bit. If you take one of those things out, they're just all white, and I'm like going back and forth trying to figure it out. But in my head, I went, man, I didn't know you could do that. So it's just those ideas and the way those ideas give me goosebumps and stuff like that. And it's like something I try to replicate in my writing a little bit, not to give myself goosebumps, but that sense of engagement, And so, and then every now and then I'll drop names and, just to sound smarter, make my character sound smarter.
Can you talk a little bit more about the process? So do you see in your mind vignettes, and then maybe it stays in your head for a while and you percolate, or so how does your creative process work?
I can't really answer that. I think part of it for me is just the same way I was just saying, I didn't know you could do that, and I'll have a conversation with someone, and I'll be like, I didn't know people still thought like that, And so those moments kind of stay with me, and I kind of want to render those sometimes. I try to figure out how. So like I read this part about too many Mexicans, right? And it comes from an actual conversation I had with my friend. We're standing on his porch, and he's having a hard time finding work, and he says too many Mexicans, but he's Mexican. So, and it's that notion of just the complexity of thought. So these little things stay in my head. So that's part of it. And the other thing is, I tend to think of these ideas or characters, and in my head, they don't really are attached to anything, but in my head, I know they belong in the same book, So in this book, I had the idea for this character, Hominy Jenkins, because I had thought of the line, people don't know who Buckwheat is, but I thought of the line of Buckwheat's understudy. Like, who was that next coon in line, And so I just loved that line. And so I had that character. And, my sister and one of my best friends work in Compton. I'm from Los Angeles. I would drive to go see them. And you're driving through the streets, and you'd see people on horseback in the middle of Compton, right? And it just would take me back to when my mom would take us to something, they would celebrate the Watts riots, not celebrate, but try to memorialize. And we'd drive through, and as a little kid, I remember seeing people on horseback, in Compton. And so I'm driving around, and, people have goats and chickens and all kind of shit, And it's just like a part of Compton that you don't really think about, that is there. And for me, it reminds me a lot of California. And then I had the notion of, what would segregation look like? What would racial segregation look like in a contemporary context? How would you do that? So I have these weird things that kind of don't go together, but I have to try to figure out a way to put them together. I mean, that's as close as I can do, And it takes me a long time. It took me 5 years to write this book, so I'm slow and not the quickest thinker in the world, so it takes me a long time. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. So I'm a writer, and I couldn't think of any good questions. So what I want to ask is, will you ask me a question?
Ask you a question. Do you ever think that you have a responsibility as a writer?
Yes.
What's the responsibility?
To be considerate of what you're writing.
Yeah. That's my question for you. That's a good answer. I think, yeah.
You know how a book ends when you start it.
Yeah, I usually have an idea where I'm going. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
You plot the whole thing out.
No, I just kind of know where I want to end up. I have to start at the end and get to the end, But yeah, I usually have an idea where it's going to end.
You said earlier that you didn't think that your book was classified as satirical.
Mm-hmm.
What would you classify it as?
I hope it's just a good book, That's how I try to think of it, The satire thing is I've been writing the same way, It's funny, I stopped writing poetry 20 years ago, but we were talking about poetry today, so I was like, I'm just going to try to read little snippets. I hate reading. So, and it just, I have to stop doing that because it took me back to reading poetry, so I'm just going to have to just keep going. But, yeah, I don't know how to answer any of that. What did you ask me? I'm sorry. I'm really, really tired.
I asked what genre you classify.
Yeah, I don't really. So what I was going to say, I guess, is so the satire thing is all of a sudden I'm a satirist, but it's all the same for me, And I think that I don't want to say the book is necessarily making people uncomfortable, but I think it's a very hard book to talk about. And so you go, it's satire, and I'm fine with if they want to do that. I just don't see myself that way. But it's, I think it's a kind of a lazy word because we all use it differently, and it's a word that people use to hide behind. I was saying this just not so long ago. There was this teacher, I think she taught junior high or high school or something, and they found out she was like a white nationalist or something. And then they were like, well, why did you do it? And she says, oh, I was just being satirical. So it's like one of those things that people use that word in weird ways that, Yeah.
When you're writing, who's the audience you have in mind?
Nobody. No. I mean, I think I struggled with that, for a while. And, with this book, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, is just kind of hovering over my shoulder. And this is a huge part of the book, but I'm not writing the book to her necessarily, but I know that at some level she will appreciate, if not understand. So I kind of just write to these non-existent best friends in a weird way, and my sister's used to be a playwright, and she said to me once, people are very, very smart, and I agree with her on that, And so it's a matter of trusting myself, but also trusting the reader, And so I don't have like a specific audience in mind. I can't write like that, Yeah.
So, I was fascinated, and I like your question about the ending part of the book. But I also heard your answer about character. So I would imagine that you have a idea of what the character is, but do you know what that character is going to do once you put him in that environment?
No. So with this book, I had the hominy character. I didn't really have the central character. I can figure I can make that up. And there's a character named Foy Cheshire in the book who's kind of like a talk show. And the character I was on the Tavis Smiley show once, and he was such a douchebag. And he just had but he just kind of typified something to me, which is people like my entire life trying to tell me how to be black, trying to tell me how to do something, It just really rankles me, and just no sense of irony other than that he knows best, And it's not just him necessarily, it's a ton of people. It's me sometimes, So I was like, man, I have to get him back somehow, and it's not him necessarily. It's a ton of stuff. God, I'm talking more than I normally do. I hate Stephen A. Smith. It's just like some people know what I'm talking about. But there's just something, a certain kind of posturing that I just try to tease out because those people often make themselves bulletproof. Yeah. Because if you criticize them, that means you're a racist. That means this and that. All this kind of crap. So see this man
Did you ever have any pushback from anybody?
Some people. The word nigger's in the book, and that makes people uncomfortable. And
That's one of the things that I love about it is that it's kind of it challenges all the preconceptions about everything. I mean, it's when I first started reading, I got to tell you, I was frustrated, and I would throw it all the time because I get pissed off about something that he wrote. And I have a chocolate lab; he'd bring it back to me. So I just kept reading it, and then at one point it just clicked, and I was like, "This is not funny. It's funny. Things are funny in it, but it plays along with a lot of things that you run into during your regular life."
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know. You start talking and. I grew up like in an all-white neighborhood for a long time. Me and my sisters, we grew up in Santa Monica, California. It's not, Then it was white and working class. Now it's just white and rich. But it's, and then we moved to West LA, which is much more integrated. And there was a thing all of a sudden about our behavior changing, the neighborhood's different, all these other things. But then there was another kind of how you're supposed to act. And it was, and in high school, I ended up going to an all-white high school, going bust out. And being around all these other white kids just reminded me of like a certain kind of casualness, like a not always having to change your behavior. And it hit me where they were taking class attendance once. And I write about this kind of stuff. This is in like my first novel. And I remember the teacher calling out the name. She'd say, Anderson. The white kids would be like, yo, so Simpson, yeah, like all this. And then call out the black kids' names or the Latino kids, and they'd be like, here, present, you know what I mean? I was like, man, what the fuck, But it kind of like just stayed with me about like, how am I going to carry myself? How am I going to do these things? And whose expectations am I going to live to? Just like there's so much of this burden of, especially for me at least, of having to be perfect, which is, no one gives you room to fail. And so all that stuff is really important to me. I was going to say some other shit, but talked out.
Are you constantly writing, or do you just let experiences happen to you and you write about it later?
Yeah, I don't write very much. I don't. But when I am writing, I'm pretty constantly writing. But I kind of just write when I have something to say, which is not very often, or something to say that I want somebody else to hear necessarily. So I don't write essays very rarely. I don't write reviews. I mean, I get asked all the time, but it's not something I enjoy. I had written it's one of the few things I think you could find that's online, but somebody had asked me when Obama was running, somebody came up to me. One, I hate it because whenever somebody asks me, it's only when somebody black dies, So it's automatically an insult. So I just it's not, 100% of the case, but a lot of the time. Anyway, so somebody had asked me to write something about Obama, and I had just been talking to a friend, and this is 2007, I guess, or somewhere in there. So, and I was like, yeah, nobody talks about, the way Obama carries himself, like his sense of cool. And so I wrote this thing for the New Republic on the sense of cool. And so I remember writing it, and the guy called me, oh, we love it, this and that. He goes, oh, people comment. I was like, oh, they do? And then I got obsessed by who was commenting, all this and it took me back to poetry, like, the audience and this thing, and that makes me very uncomfortable. So part of the reason why I don't do that, but other than this, I don't like writing very much, so I do, but I like writing when I know where I'm at or where I know I want to be lost, so yeah. 1 sec, sorry. Yeah.
I was just curious. I was going to tell the narrator's father puts him through different experiments
to
recreate racial situations that happened. What made you pick those specific?
Yeah, it's a good question. His father is like I think refers to himself as a liberation psychologist. And he says, I think the father refers to his father because his father's self-taught. He goes to homeschool. And he goes, yeah, my father's an autodidact, but he had a shitty teacher. So it's, but anyways, I used to, I was getting my doctorate in psychology, So all that stuff has really shaped how I write, how I see the world and all these kind of things. And so I try to pick these kind of classic experiments that some people would know, but even if you didn't know them, you could kind of see the methodology, you could kind of see what they were trying to prove, and those, and kind of, some traditional social psych experiments that had stayed with me, a lot about it and had shaped, so I try to use things that mean things to me at a certain level. So I don't have like a real reason, but that's as best as I can do.
I wanted to know what made you write about race in the first place.
Yeah, I don't think I write about race. Obviously I am, but, this book to me is about Los Angeles. And I think, I can think of damn near every book that I've read that it's about race, as a black kid or a kid of color. I can't speak for anybody else, but for myself, anything that I read was about race. That's how I read it. It was. And so I think for me, I get very uncomfortable with this notion that it's about race. Of course, that's a huge part of the book, but it's kind of about perspective. It's about all these other things. And, since I've been talking so much, I have to think about like how people are talking to me, like what questions people are asking me. And so one of the things I've been thinking about, and also everybody wants me to blurb their book now, So, but I think about blurbing, and I think about, so like people always compare me to DeLillo, Thomas Pynchon, I don't know, all these writers, some who I've never read, some who I admire. And I started thinking about, man, I have never seen a book by a artist of color or a writer of color. I'm sorry, I'm tired. But I've never seen a book written by a white writer that gets compared to an artist of color. So I've never seen, Amy Smith, Toni Morrison, da-da-da-da. You just don't see that. And so to me, it really speaks about the direction with what we read. And this kind of, we still have this, there's this and there's this, And I'm just saying that, we don't go back and draw these certain kind of commonalities, how we look at difference. I was at Rutgers University giving a little reading. My friend just begged me to do it, so I did it. But at the end of it, somebody asked me, so what are your literary influences? And, I said, well, I read a ton of Japanese literature and some Russian literature. And the woman who was the head of the English department, she said to me, she goes, oh, that's odd. And then I made some weird face, and she was like, yeah, I would think that black culture and Japanese culture are opposite. And I was too stunned to even laugh. I didn't know why I was pissed off. I didn't, an hour later, I was like, I can't believe she said that fucking shit. You know what I mean? But I'm just really slow. But it's that way that we think of culture, opposites, all these things. And, we don't quite always have the language to talk about this stuff, So yeah, but it affects how we read, how we look at things, how we categorize things, Yeah, expectations is a huge part of it. And that's kind of why I write, is about the expectations. I think that's a good word. Yeah.
You mentioned comments on the internet and blurbing. What do you think about Twitter?
I don't really, I got this, I got a grant to kind of help write this book. And that grant is designed to get artists more out there and all this kind of stuff. And like one of the very first things they said to me was, "Paul, you don't really have a cyber presence, you know." And so I don't do any of that shit, you know. Corey knows I don't even have a phone, so it's like, I'm sensitive, you know. So you know, and some of that stuff is kind of fun, I guess, but you know, that just doesn't really. Yeah, but I don't have anything against it. It's just not for me, you know.
How do you think Japanese literature has influenced you?
Oh, yeah.
And also, what's your favorite Kurosawa film?
Oh, that's a good question. I love so many of them. Depends. Yeah, I have to come back to me on that one afterwards. I don't want to just say Seven Samurai, even though I love it. But it's and I tend to like the one Matadayo. Do you know this one? About a professor that all these kids celebrate his birthday every year as he's getting older. Yeah, it's a beautiful film, but it's one that no one's seen anyway. What'd you ask me at first?
How do you think Japanese literature has influenced our work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if this is true in terms of influence on me, but one of the things I admire about some of those books is they're very aware of their respect, especially the books written in the 40s and the 50s. And even earlier, they're very aware of the respect and the hatred they have for Western culture in the same time, you know. So all of these kind of dueling nationalities, but also their sense of plot, you know, which is they write. It's about obsession, about all these things, but it doesn't have all this kind of American shit in it, you know. It just goes, and I don't know if that's influenced me, but it's something that's really stayed with me, and it's really about obsession, so much of it, you know, and it's different, I guess, for me, you know. But yeah, I read a ton of it. Not so much anymore. Yes.
Who are you reading right now?
I'm reading this book that I can never remember the title of. I haven't read in a while because I just talk about it without reading it. But it's a book by a woman named Annalise Chen. What's the name of that book, Kyle?
I don't know. It's hold on. Olympic exertion.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book. I just open it up. It's fantastic. And what else have I read? There's a book by Jenny Oldfield called The Department of Speculation. That stayed with me. Just kind of recent stuff. But I don't read a ton of contemporary literature.
I got so many Olympic exertions.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book. Yes.
When I'm writing essays for English, I have a hard time developing a title. I
Mm.
don't know how that's going to influence the rest of the work. But how do you come up with your titles?
Every now and then I get lucky and they come up really quickly. It doesn't happen very often. I just kind of think about it and then not think about it, and it pops in my head, you know. But it's nice when it comes early, you know, because you know what you're writing about. You know, you get lost every now and then. Just go, oh yeah, my title's this, and it just means so much to you, and you can kind of get back on track. So I wish I could do them at the beginning, but it doesn't always happen. But yeah.
When you're writing, do you ever feel pressured that you have to represent all Black people, or is that something?
I welcome that. I want to represent all Black people. No, I just I don't worry about it. Yeah, no.
You mentioned you're a huge movie buff. Is there any movies you're excited for that are coming out?
Yeah, I'm not as huge as I used to be, but and I kind of hate movies now. So yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen like a new movie that's really, really moved me. Don't ask me because I hate everything, so I'm the wrong person. So I don't know what's coming out. I just don't. But sorry about that. Is there something I should be looking out for?
I'm excited for Ready Player One. It's supposed to be pretty good.
Ready Player One. I don't know what that is. So. Yeah, I said, people ask me, why'd you write this? I was like, I needed some money, you know. It's not completely untrue, but, no, not obviously, but, you know, there's nothing that gives me satisfaction that I get from writing, you know. It forces me to think and try to figure out how to talk about, how to render things that I'm thinking about, you know. It's when I worked a long time on this book, and a small college in Detroit called Marygrove College, I think, had done this really nice thing with the public school system where they had given the kids a bunch of my books, like part of the thing, like, thousands of the books. So they invited me to come talk and all this kind of stuff. And then afterwards they had like a small little reading. And I just had kind of just finished the book. So I just kind of printed some of it out and started reading. And I got like to the third page and I just started crying uncontrollably. And I could not stop. And then I felt so bad. I was like, okay, now I got to talk about why I'm crying. And I don't really know. And it's the first time it's ever happened to me. And so, but one of the things it just hit me like how hard I'd been working on this book and how close it was to the way I wanted it to sound, and it doesn't happen very much. But, so that's not your answer necessarily, but that's part of it. It's, obviously there's something that I get out of it. I don't do it.
Can you speak to that just a little bit more? Because I think part of it, like students misunderstand, like when you say that. And I think part of it is because it's very emotional writing, and it's work.
Yeah, it's definitely work.
It's not like it's like it's like easy. I mean, it is really work, and so I think that's part of it. It doesn't mean that you don't enjoy like the process itself, maybe, but it's work, and you have respect for that and what it takes out of you emotionally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't have to say it. You said it. So, I mean, you're dead on. That's exactly it.
Another huge aspect of that, obviously, is identity. And you've shared with us a lot about your personal identity. Is there anything about that you might want to expound upon and about Bonbon's identity?
About the identity of the people in the book, you're saying? Or
about your identity. Our identity and what we might take.
Y'all didn't pay that much money to be like, no. No, I mean, for me, it's like this, it's about the shift, So one of the things, it's not like I enjoy it, but I often get... So I was just in France and talking to all these journalists, and this one woman sat down and so I want to talk about like how political your book is. And we talked for a little bit. And then the next woman sat down and the very first thing she said to me, so I want to talk about like how come your books aren't political? So it's one of those things that has, even when I used to write poetry, I would get all these shifts. And every now and then, like some women will stand up and be offended by something that's in the book. But so many other times, like somebody will come up and the interviewer will say, well, are you a black feminist? All these other kind of things. So, I mean, there's just about all the angles. And it's not like the book isn't whatever anybody thinks it is. But so for me, it's all the perspective. How can I put in there? And then hopefully people understand that I'm not trying to offend, But for me, the profane is like a huge part of our lives that we don't really talk about very often. So that's really important to me. And then and in some ways it's about identity, but it's about kind of, I don't really even know how to talk about it, And yeah.
How about one more? How do you go about writing your sentences? Like, is it planned and deliberate, or do you just get on a roll?
Yeah, it takes forever. Yeah, I mean, it takes forever. It takes forever. I have an idea of what I'm trying to do in a certain passage or trying a certain scene, and it's about choosing the right words. And, I try to take my time, and rewrite. And every now and then I go, yeah, that's it. It's hard for me to move on if something's not right, And then, I have a chunk of something and then I have to make that right, So it's like a word by word thing for me. And poetry is one of those things that really helped me kind of at least have an idea of what I'm trying to say and how I want to say it. I wish I had like a little template, but I don't, like kind of fill in the blanks, but I don't, Yeah.
What got you to write the Russian books?
I don't know. My mom had a really great, me and my sisters we didn't grow up with television, so my mom had like a very good library, so we read, but she didn't have any Russian literature. I think, you turn 23 and you realize you haven't read all the shit that people are talking about and you pick it up, So it wasn't, any kind of real thing. And I was going to go into this whole sensibility thing, but I'll stop.
First of all, I like the way you talk.
Yeah.
Do you work on more than one book at a time, or do you just try completing one and move to another?
Yeah, I can't multitask, so it's it gets tough, because one of the ways that I was able to make a living, without writing very much is I would do screenplays and stuff, and nothing that's come out, sorry. But and those paid pretty well, but they would really take me out from everything I was thinking about. But sometimes they gave me the time to figure it out, what I was wanting to say. So I'm very thankful for that kind of stuff, But yeah, it's hard for me to do two things at once. But I'm going to have to get better at it a little bit, I think. But it's hard for me. Yeah.
Hey, Paul, maybe one or two more.
Sure. Yes.
So one of my favorite things reading the book was seeing just different references to movies, TVs, pop culture. Because I guess I'm just a movie buff.
Yeah.
But seeing the character kind of go through those and relate different things that he sees to those references. When you start writing a book, do you think about what you want to put in there reference-wise?
No, I don't. I mean, other than The Little Rascals, which I knew was going to be a big part of the book, but no. But I think, I used to think about this stuff, and I don't know how old I was, maybe in my early 20s, I read Dante's The Inferno, and I realized that book is just pop culture. He's just talking about these towns, these popes, these bishops that were all really relevant to his time. I have no idea who these people are, and it's footnoted to death. But I realize he's just kind of writing about the shit that's kind of in front of his face, that's behind here a little bit. But it's still, nonetheless, it's still engaging. It's still these, all these things. And I just think about the things I read. So, I used to be a huge Mad magazine fan, and like these things, Real Cream, all this shit that had nothing to do with me, but it carried some kind of weight, somehow. It just kind of refuses to die until it dies, But I realize those things are just kind of placeholders, things, so it's not that important necessarily. Whereas with The Little Rascals, it was such a big part of the book. That was one of the hardest parts to do because I was like, no one knows what the fuck The Little Rascals are. But it's about I think the way I did it is, how can I make these racist things even more racist? That was my challenge. So then there's another narrative in there that has nothing really to do with The Little Rascals themselves. So I try to figure out ways to do it.
Have you ever been offended by the way that someone interprets your work?
Offended?
Or upset? Whichever.
Yeah, maybe. I think with my second novel, a guy wrote this review, and I wasn't offended what he said about the book, but he completely misread the book. And it's the thing of like when maybe I didn't do my job well enough, but where people just refuse to look at anything with any sense of irony, So then he took it and he was like, oh, Paul's some young Republican who's trying to make his way as a neo. I was like, where is this fucking coming from? But now the same person has read this book and is apparently singing my praises and I'm this and I'm that, So, but that one was personal. Like I was like, he does not know me, So it wasn't about the book. Like, yeah, but that was weird. And I try not to read like that. I try not to read something and pretend that I know somebody because I've read them, So, because that feels lazy and that's more about the person writing the review. But you're allowed to do that. But I don't know if I was offended by it, but I was a little pissed. Yeah.
You mentioned in the novel that the reason they don't permit cameras in the Supreme Court has nothing to do with maintaining decorum or dignity, or rather to protect the country from seeing what's underneath Plymouth Rock. It's apparent that the judicial system in this country acts more as a turbulent free-for-all, organized only by cronyism, nationalistic flatulence, and a reoccurring excuse for moral common sense disguised as bureaucracy, as opposed to the ostensibly free Constitution itself. My question is whether you personally express hope for the Ninth Amendment and the prospective value of the Constitution when pertaining to equality and due process of law, or if you believe it will be indefinitely demoted to meaningless, ink-blotted parchment paper that the Supreme Court can wipe their ass with.
Welcome to Constitutional Law 305. What are you asking me about? Like, is the Constitution going to be around in 50 years, or?
I mean, moving forward, do you think that it has any value at all?
Yeah, obviously it has some value. If only because you get to point at something. There's so many other places where we've got this thing to point out contradiction. You know, well, you said X. It says here. You know, so it obviously has some value. You know, and I mean, I think it has value to different people. Like, I remember being, you know, the age of most of these students here, and we were trying to organize with these other student groups. You know, me and mostly black friends at the time with some other groups, and on the way, one of my friends had been kind of harassed by the campus police. And I always remember this kid, Abe Shookman, beautiful cat. But like my friend was telling the story, and Abe was so upset. He was like, "No, you have constitutional laws. We got to do something, you know," because that means something different to him than it does to us, you know. And I don't want to speak for my friends, you know, but it does mean something, you know. I mean, it's, you know, it's as Trump is showing, it's all fucking smoke and mirrors at some level, you know. But it's kind of this, you know, it's you know, you called it parchment. It's old. It's yellow. It's got a bunch of antecedents, you know, Native American things that, you know, that are influences that are going into. So even symbolically, it means something. But yeah, I don't really have an answer to that, you know, because I don't know. But I mean, I don't equate, you know, democracy with permanence. You know, I think we often think of these things as like natural laws. You know, like if you listen to the news, they talk about like the market. You know, like they're talking about geothermal energy or something. You know, like these are like, you know, telluric forces. And so the one thing I know, and that's actually one of the things that Obama has said lately that I've said, hey, you're actually trying to almost say something. But he was talking about like how he was talking about like democracy is this kind of garden that has to be tended to. You know, it's not fixed. You know, it's not. And so I was appreciative to that. You know, so yeah. Yeah. I'm slowly backing off. Sorry. Oh, I don't know any Latin at all. So, you know, I just pretended like I knew Latin. I like the idea of, you know, translating all this stuff into Latin. You know, I know some German. You know, my third novel is like half in German, but you know, I try to use the German that means something to me. There's some Spanish in the book, you know, and I try to use the Spanish that means something to me. You know, somehow. Yeah, the first time I heard somebody call somebody a mayate, you know, it's like, but like in asking somebody, you know, what does that mean? All these kind of things. And so it's just all means something to me, you know. And, yeah, there's so much. I mean, I said, you know, it's all old school. You know, I'm old. So it's this notion of how those languages change and how they stay the same. So for me, California is really interesting because the slang kind of stays the same for a long time. I can't speak for Texas. But it's one of the things, as much as the state changes, the slang, rad, gnarly, all these words are so fucking old. You know, my niece, when she was young, would be like the word gat for gun or something. And she'd be shocked, you know, because I'd be sitting there watching some old Edward G. Robinson movie. And she'd, you know, they would say gat. And she'd go, what? You know, so, you know, so I don't know. But for me, it's so much about California. You know, the way different people talk and dialect and, yeah. So I don't really speak anything other than bad Californian, I don't think. But thank you guys. Appreciate it. Thanks.